But I wasn't asking about intelligent design, just
design. Oh, yeah. Well, even the Darwinists acknowledge design, but they want to say it's apparent.
Yes.
They want to say, Richard Dawkins says, biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose, where the key word is appearance.
Right.
And that's, by the way, the origin of the term intelligent design. When we were beginning to realize that there was compelling evidence of intelligent causation, was the way some of the early ID pioneers put it, we were casting about for a name for our theory. And we wanted to contrast it clearly with the central proposition of the Darwinian synthesis, which is that things look designed, but they're not really designed because there's a purely undirected process that's sufficient to produce the appearance of design, the illusion of design. And so we thought the way to make clear what we were arguing against and also what we were for was to contrast the idea of intelligent design with merely apparent design, which is the key, the Darwinian view. And so Richard Dawkins acknowledges, for example, that the machine code of the genes, as he puts it, is uncannily computer-like. It looks like something that was designed by a software programmer, but he wants to hold out for an explanation that will account for that appearance apart from an actual mind or intelligence having played a role.
Sort of an unintelligent intelligence.
Yes, exactly. It's the idea is that you have a purely undirected process producing the appearance of design, and the undirected process is not guided or directed in any way.
And as soon as we say design, to talk about intelligent design is almost, if not altogether, a redundancy. But
you would think, but this is the counterintuitive nature of the Darwinian proposal.
Exactly. But going back to Kant and his critique of pure reason and his critique of the traditional arguments for God, and he dismissed the cosmological and the ontological and all of that. The one thing he said that really burdened him was the teleological argument, the argument from design. Even then, he talked about the starry skies above and the moral law within, that those were the two things he really couldn't get a handle on. And David Hume, who's considered the father of all this skepticism, had the same sense of burden and reacted against those people who wanted to substitute chance as this power, when, of course, chance has no power because it has no ontology. But since these two men...
Yeah, it's a name for something
that we don't know what.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's interesting how fiercely people oppose the idea of the presence of intelligence when the design is overwhelming. Some people following Kant...
Yeah, let me just... a couple anecdotal things that underscore this and also, I think, help explain the key argument of the book. But I'm standing on the soccer sidelines watching my daughter play in a game a few years ago. She has a kind of gruff coach, shaved head, but he's a Microsoft programmer. And I had no idea he had any interest in the philosophy of science. Came up on the sideline while the game was in full flower, and he bumps kind of like this, and he says, "So what do these Darwinists think? The code just wrote itself?" And then he pauses and he says, "Not at Microsoft." And that was his take on the debate that I'm involved in. But it's actually a very compelling kind of observation. Bill Gates himself has said that DNA is like a software program, but much more complex than any we've ever created. And we know, and this gets to the central argument of the book, we know from experience, from uniform and repeated experience, which is the basis of all scientific reasoning, that programs always come from programmers. We know more generally that information in whatever form we find it, especially if it's in a digital or alphabetic form, always comes from an intelligent source, whether we're talking about a hieroglyphic inscription, a paragraph in a book, a headline in a newspaper, information embedded in a radio signal. Information always comes from an intelligent source, from a mind, not a material process. So the discovery of information embedded in digital form along the spine of the DNA molecule is a compelling indicator of prior intelligent activity. That's the central argument of the book, and it's something that I think is so almost commonsensical to people who have an intimate acquaintance with information technology, like Microsoft programmers, that the case for intelligent design, I think, is becoming very, very compelling. And we sense the debate is starting to shift in our favor because, in a sense, we own the metaphors. People understand information technology, they understand information processing systems. We are using those technologies all the time. We invent them, we create them, but we also know that information is the product of mind. It comes from no other source. There's only one known cause of a given effect. If you see the effect, you can reason back to the cause, and that's essentially what my book does.
Well, you know, the most celebrated atheist of Great Britain in the 20th century, even apart from Bertrand Russell, was Anthony Flew, who developed the famous parable, Flew's parable,
right.
where he finds this, the explorer comes into this jungle and finds this perfectly manicured garden, and which screamed for the reality of a garden, and he was skeptical about all of that, and now he has come full circle to embrace theism. And the key thing that got to Flew was he came to the understanding that if there is not design that is intelligible, there's no possibility for science of any kind to operate.
Right.
Because it's all chaos, and science itself becomes an illusion. And so the fact that if the world is designed, if it's orderly, then it's intelligible. And you don't get unintelligible intelligibility. That's what finally convinced him. He should have seen it in his own parable 50 years ago. But he didn't.
He's a very interesting figure and a brilliant man.
Yes.
When the articles came out about his intellectual conversion in 2004, he was quoted as saying that his perspective on this bore some similarity to that of those American design theorists, as he put it. And he specifically cited the importance of the DNA argument and the fine-tuning arguments as having had a role in this change of mind. Your comment, though, about the importance of design to the whole scientific endeavor is a very important one. Oftentimes people will object to the work we're doing on intelligent design by saying it's a science stopper. But in fact, the idea of intelligent design was the science starter. There was a key word in the vocabulary of the scientists who started what we call the scientific revolution, that period in which modern science as we know it came to full flower between about 1300 and 1700. There was an assumption that they had, and that was that nature is intelligible. And they believed that it was intelligible because it was the product of a rational mind. And therefore, our minds, being made in the image of that rational mind, whom they took to be God, could understand the design, the order, the patterns that were in nature, and that made it worth the hard work of interrogating nature, of investigating nature, because we would eventually get to that deeper underlying order or pattern or design as a result of those investigations. So Kepler put it really poetically, saying that the natural philosopher, the person we call the scientist today, has the high calling of thinking God's thoughts after him.
Yes, exactly.
So when people say, design is a science starter or a stopper, I would say, well, it didn't seem to stop Sir Isaac Newton or Johannes Kepler.
Ultimate chaos is the science ender.
Yes, exactly.
And then you have to go down to the fact of whether this sense manifold that we have is the design that we find there's something that we impose upon chaos, or are we responding to something that's really there? That was the problem that Hume ended up with in his graveyard of empiricism, that Kant tried to save science from that kind of skepticism. Because if it's something that's pure subjectivity, there is no knowledge, which is what science is.
Right, and you can turn that as an argument against any particular argument for intelligent design based upon the empirical evidence of the natural world. You can say, well, it's just the human mind imposing that perception of design. It doesn't last very long, though, because we keep seeing it. And
not only that, but then you have to account for the human beings.
That's the key.
Imposition,
and this is
intelligent imposition.
The work that Alvin Plantinga has done in making the case that the ultimate question in epistemology is on what basis can we trust in the reliability of the human mind.